And is that clear for most of you? Do you want the lights dimmed or no? I think that's fine. So what we're going to do this afternoon is to discuss the background of our Inuit world. After the presentation, I'm just going to read off this background and also think about it as a discussion, and it'll give us food for thought. And what we're going to do is look at this, and I'm going to look at it in terms of this presentation. My co-facilitator, she's going to explain the highlights. And we brought up the idea, or somebody mentioned about the monthly calendar of Inuit. And you yourselves, as the participants, will be able to write down or also consider in your mind the months of the year, and you could participate in that way as well by contributing. The culture of Inuit. It just disappeared on us. Here we go. Inuit were basically rooted in self-sufficiency. They were able to live off the land and work well with one another. According to the traditional knowledge, there are tremendous value-based, rooted in the culture. And Inuit were basically rooted with the wildlife as a part of their foundation. Inuit had knowledge individually through storytelling, and by being able to bring that oral knowledge, passing on to through the generations. In terms of Inuit knowledge, in terms of the environment, for centuries, eons and ancient times, Inuit would have knowledge of their land. I sometimes recall when this comes up, even just recently, it brings to mind, like when we saw the elders sitting on the table earlier this morning, I sometimes tend to think that they are talking from the heart. And that's because they're talking from the heart. It's not because it's not something that they've written down. It's something that were passed on to them through the generations. And that's how it is for the culture and Inuit society. And what I tend to refer and go back to, the white society tend to have a base where their laws are ruling, and papers tend to be the necessities of their society. And that's how it is in the world. And so for years, Inuit have sustained their culture through oral traditions. How Inuit taught one another and how they taught their families. Inuit would teach through observation. And Inuit were basically teaching one another to be living harmoniously by having to work together, and also how to handle situations through collective ideas and collective brainstorming. And then therefore where everybody was able to contribute, and then through that they would be able to come up with a solution. And then they had leaders where it wasn't through elections, but it was through observation as to who best would be able to lead the people the best way. And we had heard a little bit to that this morning. And also the person will be able to lead the people well, be able to stand amongst their people. And Inuit traditional values are well rooted in harmonious living. Inuit were concerned about people who had problems with their health or who had problems in their day-to-day life, and they would be cared for as a whole society. So the well-being of the individual was also considered amongst by the whole society, and Mika will contribute a bit on that in terms of more ideas and input. So she's going to turn the mic on. Yes, I agree. I agree with you. And to hear that, it's something we don't hear often. It's something that almost got forgotten. It's almost like an old clothing that just started to get buried in the ground. That's how our culture was at one time, where we could say it was almost lost. However, our culture can be improved, and there can be improvisations made to continue to have strength in our culture and identity and our values. And our strength was changed through colonization, and the elders were looking down on themselves. Even the men and the women were starting to have poor self-esteem. And even though they knew a lot in terms of traditions and culture values that were passed on down to them through the years, and I could see that there were changes that were being made by our people. However, there has been a turnaround slowly in terms of taking back our traditional values and our traditions. I don't know if it's going to be to the full swing of how it would have been in the past, but I could say that we could take the best of the past and bring it forward. And one of the things that I thought about was that Inuit were not held by their hand, and they were able to stay standing up and continue to face their challenges on a daily basis. And now I could see that we are in a welfare state as it has been for some years now, and that has to change. And so it's something I like to hear about, that the elders were talking about some of the examples of how the traditions and the values that they talked about. And I could say that they still have a lot of knowledge that they experience, that they've seen, or through the oral history. It's just something that's just at the tip of the surface that people have brought out. But I'm sure through research that we can dig some more into the culture as to take what we can and move forward with those ideas that had been around for centuries. And so I think we can take this and learn. For example, a man would be able to help lead the community, so they were in charge of trying to lead their people into a brighter future and be aware of people who were less fortunate, and so they were provided for. And I'm happy to hear that we can think about returning to the traditional values and perhaps taking on the challenges that we have today and be able to come up with ideas that will help our people, and even including some of the ideas or stories that people have shared so that we can try to come up with best solutions and best practices. Thank you. That's it? Yes, thank you. I think we can just story tell all day long, but we don't have the time. Thank you, Mika. And lastly,
the last slide, please.
And this is the last slide. These are the months of the Inuit calendar. And so I tried to be as complete as possible. It's based on Igloolik people. And I realized that depending on where you are geographically, the calendars might be a little bit different, and accordingly to where the people live. I will use this dialect, and this is open to revisions from anybody that would like to contribute. First of all, from the top, I'm going to say Ukiuk Tauwitjuaq. Tauwitjuaq is on the top. This Tauwitjuaq is referring to the dark times of the year. Ukiuk Sikhinarut. This is where the sun starts to go above the horizon. Qangattasat. It's still within the winter months, but it also is where the sun is rising even further up the horizon. Abunit. It's closer to spring. She's trying to read the Upingaksaya. Abunit is closer to spring. And you know, Abunit is like when the the pups are being born. So you know that time of the year where the first group of pups are being born. That's when the Abunit is referred to. Natiat. It's still like early spring. And it's also the time where an abundance of seal pups are born, and the second group of pups. Tiriglutit is springtime. Where the offsprings are born. For example, the caribou are having offspring, so their fawns are being born at the time. So Tiriglutit is that time of the year. And another one is Manit. That's where the wildlife has eggs on the land. Saggarut. So Saggarut is summer. That's where the caribou skins are starting to shed their winter coat. And so they have thin coats. And now Qaqqaliaq is the middle of summer. That's where also a change start to happen for the caribou. Their furs start to get thicker. Amirayaut is another time of the year during the fall. That's where you notice the caribou antlers. There's antlers. They're shedding their outer antlers. Also, Qaqqaliaq is another time in the fall. That's the beginning of the winter months. And now we go to Tusaktut, and that's during the winter months. And Tusaktut is where people who were from different camps finally started to hear about one another, how they were dealing with this is, and then we're going back to the beginning. And so these are the ones that are different in terms of the different dialects and the different subregions where people lived. And that's what we had requested at one time, to find out what the months are and how they refer to. And something to consider is how Inuit, how they would be able to prepare for the next winter or through the winter months, and when they were able to prepare for the spring or summer. So they would always be in a mode of preparing for the future. So, and also we would like you to contribute to that idea as to how people would be able to plan the year. So the floor is open. If maybe we can get the lights back on.